3 months ago, during the summer break, something happened that still feels surreal at times. My 35-year-old uncle Donald, a handsome and well-built man, invited me to his apartment. I remembered him from my childhood, but we hadn't seen each other in about 5 years. I thought it was a great idea because I had nothing to do at home. Little did I know what was about to unfold. Despite being 35, he looked much younger, handsome, and in excellent shape, clearly someone who takes care of himself. His skin and hair were always perfect, and his scent, a blend of fresh cologne and something uniquely him, was unmistakable. Every time we were together, that scent lingered, and it drove me a little wild. So he invited me over to his place for a summer getaway, just the two of us. His apartment was exactly what you'd expect. Stylish but cozy, with a cool vibe that seemed effortless, just like him. I felt a mix of excitement and nerves, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. Once we arrived, the first thing he did was grab me a cold beer, a classic Donald move, both laid back and considerate. He handed it to me with his signature smile, the one that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Then he said, "I'm going to change. Make yourself comfortable." I nodded, trying to act calm, but inside my heart was racing. I'd known him for a long time, but something about being in his space made everything feel more intense. I sat down with my beer, trying to distract myself by taking in the room. It was minimalist but stylish dark wood floors, a few framed photos on the shelves, and soft leather furniture. The scent of him was subtly in the air. Then I heard footsteps down the hallway, and before I knew it, I was following him. I don't know why, but it felt like something was pulling me toward him. His bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't resist. What I saw was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed before. There he was, standing with his back to the door, taking off his shirt. His muscles moved under his skin like something out of a movie. His broad back and defined shoulders and arms were striking. His skin was smooth and tan, and I watched his back muscles flex as he pulled the shirt off. Then he dropped his pants, and I wasn't prepared for what came next. His legs were just as toned and powerful as his upper body, like he could run a marathon or lift a car. And his ass firm and muscular was the kind of shape that made my mouth go dry. I found myself biting my lip, a warm sensation spreading through me, deeper and deeper, like a slow-burning fire. My heart was racing, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I knew I shouldn't be there, shouldn't be watching him, but every part of me was drawn to him. My hands were sweating and my mouth was dry. I finally snapped back to reality when he finished changing. I quickly turned around and practically ran back to the living room, trying to act casual. I sat down, taking small sips of my beer, attempting to calm my racing heart. But the image of him standing there so at ease and completely unaware of the effect he had on me kept playing in my mind. It was the most intense experience I'd ever had, and I had no idea what would happen next. I was still trying to settle myself when he came back into the living room, now wearing a fresh white t-shirt and loose grey shorts. Simple, but he made it look like he belonged on a magazine cover. His hair was still damp, and his scent hit me again, even stronger now, clean. Fresh, with that elusive hint of something I couldn't quite identify but knew I'd never forget. He flopped down next to me on the couch, close enough for me to feel his warmth radiating. He took a long sip of his beer, leaned back and sighed. "Man, it's been a week. Work's been crazy. I'm beat." He glanced at me with a small, tired smile. "I think I'm going to take a nap." "Hope that's cool." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, you deserve it." He closed his eyes and leaned back into the couch, one arm casually draped over the backrest, his legs spread wide in that effortless, confident way that some guys have. I tried to focus on my beer, but my eyes kept drifting back to him, the way his t-shirt stretched across his chest, how his jaw relaxed as he began to unwind. There was something so raw and genuine about seeing him like that, unguarded and vulnerable. I'm not sure what came over me. Maybe it was the beer. Maybe it was the tension that had been building up for weeks, or maybe it was everything I'd felt but never said. Whatever it was, I stood up, set my beer down and walked toward him. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He didn't open his eyes as I approached, and for a moment I almost hesitated. Without really thinking, I moved behind the couch and placed my hands on his shoulders. He stiffened for a brief moment before relaxing, letting out a sigh. "Damn," he muttered, his voice gravelly and deep. "That feels good." I began to knead his shoulders, sensing the tension in the muscles beneath my touch. His skin was warm, his shoulders broad and firm. I could feel the stress melting away under my fingers as his breathing slowed and his body softened. I worked my hands down to the base of his neck, then back up, easing out the knots. I'm unsure of how long I did this, but I could feel him sinking deeper into the couch, his head tilting forward slightly. I moved my hands to the back of his neck and ran my fingers through his hair, lingering at the base of his skull. He made a low noise, almost a groan that sent a shiver through me. Every part of me was on edge, my skin tingling. My heart raced as I leaned in and kissed his cheek, light and quick, just to test the waters. He didn't pull away, didn't even open his eyes. So I kissed him again, this time on the corner of his jaw. My lips brushed against the stubble, rough and warm. I moved upward to his ear, pressing a kiss just below it, then trailed my lips down to his neck. His skin was heated under my touch, and I could feel the pulse beneath it. I was on fire, every nerve alive, waiting for his reaction. I wasn't sure if he would push me away, laugh it off, or tell me to stop, but then he reached up, his hand slipping into my hair, fingers curling at the back of my head. He didn't say anything, didn't open his eyes, he just held me there, his grip firm yet gentle. I continued kissing his neck, moving slowly, tasting the salt of his skin. His breathing deepened, his chest rising and falling beneath me. His other hand found my hip, fingers pressing in just enough to make my head spin. I didn't understand what was happening or where this was headed. All I knew was that I didn't want to stop. His hand stayed at the back of my head, fingers steady in my hair, guiding me but not forcing me. I kept kissing his neck, feeling his pulse under my lips, each beat drawing me deeper into this haze of desire. His skin was almost burning, and his slow, controlled breathing made me want him even more. I moved around the couch to stand in front of him. His eyes were still closed, his head tilted back, but there was a small smirk on his lips, as though he knew exactly what was going on. I couldn't take it any longer. I straddled him, settling onto his knees. My hands rested on his chest, and his eyes finally opened, locking onto mine. There was a look in them I couldn't quite describe. It was as though he saw everything I was feeling, everything I wanted, and it mirrored exactly what he felt. I leaned in, our faces mere inches apart, and I could feel his breath against my lips. The air between us was electric, charged so intensely that I could barely think. Then he closed the gap, pressing his lips to mine. It wasn't soft or hesitant, it was urgent, demanding. His mouth moved against mine like he'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. Our tongues met, and the world seemed to disappear. I slid my hands under his t-shirt, feeling the hard muscles of his abs tense beneath my touch. He lifted his arms, and I pulled his shirt off, tossing it aside. The sight of him shirtless, breathing heavily, eyes dark with desire, was almost overwhelming. His chest was broad and sculpted, every muscle perfectly defined. I traced my fingers down his torso, over the ridges of his abs, feeling the strength beneath his skin. His hands found my waist, fingers digging in as he pulled me closer. I could feel the heat of his body through my clothes, every point where we touched sending sparks through me. I leaned down, pressing kisses along his jaw, down his neck, and across his collarbone. He tilted his head back, releasing a low, rumbling sound that made my entire body shiver. I kissed my way down his chest, tasting the salt on his skin, feeling his muscles tense and relax beneath my lips. At some point, my shirt ended up on the floor, and his hands roamed over my bare skin, strong and sure, leaving a trail of fire wherever they touched. He leaned forward, his mouth on my neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin there. I couldn't stop the soft moan that escaped my lips, and he responded by pulling me even closer, his hands gripping my hips. I slid down off his lap, kneeling between his legs. I looked up at him, and he was watching me with an intensity that made my heart race. I won't go into too much detail here, you can fill in the blanks, but let's just say the sounds he made, those low, breathless groans, were the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. His head fell back against the couch, his hands in my hair, his body tensing and relaxing under my touch. And let's just say I'd never experienced anything like this before. I was so lost in the moment that I completely forgot what I was doing. Or rather, who I was doing it with, my goddamn uncle, not just any guy. As I write this now, I'm still startled by what happened. When he pulled me up, his eyes were darker than I had ever seen before. He took my hand and led me to the couch, his presence steady. He gently pressed me down, his body over mine, his weight solid and comforting. His hands were all over me, stroking, pressing, caressing, and I couldn't get enough of him. It was intense and raw. I won't lie, it hurt at first. Let's just say he's not small. But there was something about the way he held me, the way his hands moved over my skin, that made it feel right, safe. He was strong and confident, but also careful, like he knew exactly how to balance the line between pleasure and pain. Over time, the pain faded, replaced by an overwhelming wave of pleasure. His rhythm, his touch, it was as if he knew my body better than I did. Every movement, every thrust sent shivers through me. His hands gripped my hips, guiding me, and I could feel the strength in them, the way they held me firmly but not roughly. The sounds he made, God, I can still hear them low, deep, almost primal. He wasn't merely going through the motions, he was fully immersed, completely lost in the moment, and I was right there with him. It wasn't only physical, it was something more. There was a connection, an intensity, as if we were both exposing everything, laid bare. We moved together, our bodies flawlessly in sync, and outside that room nothing else mattered. It was only us, only this. Every touch, every kiss, every breath we shared was charged with electricity. The tension between us built and built until it felt like I might explode. We were still tangled up on the couch, both of us catching our breath, the room thick with that after-intimacy haze. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, his chest firm against mine, solid and reassuring. There was a sense of safety, like his warmth wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something that wrapped around me, holding me in place. His arms remained around me, strong and steady, and I could feel his heartbeat slowing, syncing with mine. He shifted slightly, leaning up just enough so his body pressed against my back, then wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me closer. I melted into him, his body heat intense, almost searing, but in the best way. Every part of me felt connected to him, as if I was part of something larger than myself. He leaned in, his breath warm against my neck, and I felt his lips soft and deliberate, pressing gentle kisses along my shoulder. He didn't rush. Each kiss was slow, lingering, as if he was savoring the moment. I could feel the stubble on his jaw brush against my skin, contrasting with the softness of his lips, sending shivers down my spine. Then he did something that made my entire body weaken. He buried his face in the crook of my neck and just breathed me in. It wasn't merely a kiss or a touch. It was something more. I could feel him inhaling deeply, as if trying to memorize my scent, taking a part of me into himself. His breath was hot against my skin, and when he exhaled, it sent a wave of goosebumps over me. He kissed my neck again, slower this time, his lips moving up toward my ear. The way he moved, the way he held me, was both possessive and tender, like he was claiming me but also protecting me. His hands roamed over my stomach, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my skin. Each touch was electric, sending shivers through me, making me hyper-aware of every place where our bodies connected. I leaned back into him, my head resting against his shoulder, and he tightened his arms around me. I felt anchored, as if I could let go of everything and simply exist in that moment with him. The warmth of his body seeped into mine, and I could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest against my back. He nuzzled his face into my neck again, pressing another soft kiss just below my ear. "You drive me crazy," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. The way he said it, like it was something he couldn't control, sent a thrill through me. I turned my head slightly, our faces so close our noses brushed. His eyes were dark, intense, and there was this look in them as if he could see right through me. He pressed his forehead against mine, his breath mingling with mine, and for a moment we just stayed like that, no words, no movement, just existing. Then he kissed me again, soft and slow, as though he was trying to pour everything he couldn't express into that one kiss. His hands moved up my sides, tracing every curve, every line. It wasn't just physical, it felt like he was memorizing me, learning me. His fingers brushed over my ribs, up to my shoulders, then back down. Each touch sent waves of heat through me. I couldn't help but smile, a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the physical heat. I turned around to face him, and he pulled me into his lap, his arms still wrapped around me. His hand spread across my back, holding me close as if he couldn't bear the thought of any space between us. I think at one point he forgot, but it was funny. After it was all over, I found myself lying on his chest, his strong arms wrapped around me, holding me close. The room was silent. The only sounds were our slowing breaths and the soft rustle of the breeze outside the window. His skin was warm beneath me, his heartbeat a steady, comforting rhythm against my ear. The rise and fall of his chest felt like an anchor, grounding me in a moment I never wanted to end. His fingers traced gentle patterns through my hair, moving slowly, almost absent-mindedly. Each touch he made brought a calming sensation over me, something deeply personal, something beyond the physical act we had just shared. It felt as though he was attempting to offer me comfort, to reassure both me and, perhaps, even himself. His touch was gentle, cautious, as though he feared I might drift away if he released me. We remained there in quiet for a while, entwined in each other's presence, the warmth of our bodies blending into a cocoon of security. I could feel the tension easing from him, his muscles relaxing under me, but there was still a subtle heaviness, an unspoken burden. His fingers in my hair slowed, and I noticed a shift in his breathing, growing deeper as if he were gathering his thoughts. Then he released a deep breath, and the weight of it was unmistakable. His chest rose and fell beneath me, and I could sense the tension inside him, but now it was different, tighter, more controlled, as though he was suppressing something. The warmth that had once felt so comforting now seemed fragile, as if it might break with the wrong word. I could tell he was trying to find a way to articulate something, to explain or justify something undefined. Regret lingered in the way his hand paused and in the slight movement of his body underneath me. I could feel the unspoken apology even before he voiced it, a silent request for understanding. It was in the stillness of his fingers in my hair, the way his breath caught for a split second. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was coming. It was wrong. We shouldn't have let it go that far. I could feel the weight of it pressing on him, the guilt creeping in, as if he was trying to pull away while still holding me close. But I wasn't going to let him. I shifted slightly enough to meet his gaze, and I saw it, the inner battle he was fighting. His eyes were dark, troubled, filled with 1,000 unspoken words. There was guilt, yes, but also something else, longing, vulnerability that he was hiding. I reached up, my fingers gently tracing his jawline, the rough stubble beneath my touch. I could sense the tension there, the way his jaw clenched, holding back the words he thought he needed to say. There was a moment of silence, a stillness where everything hung in the balance. And then I did what felt right. I placed my finger softly against his lips, stopping the words before they could escape. I didn't need to hear them. I didn't want to. This wasn't something to apologize for or regret. It was real, something we both needed, and I wasn't going to let him rewrite it. I looked into his eyes, my own filled with certainty and honesty that couldn't be denied. I didn't need to say much because the truth was clear. This wasn't something he had done to me. It was something we had shared, something I wanted just as much as he did. I had started it. I had made the first move, and I wasn't sorry, not for a single second. I let my hand rest on his cheek, my thumb brushing over his skin. There was no room for regret here, and I silently conveyed that through my touch that this was mine too, that I was just as responsible for what happened. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, something I had needed. That night, we fell asleep together, wrapped in each other's arms on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, for a moment, I couldn't recall everything that had happened. My mind was foggy, caught between sleep and reality. It took a few seconds for the haze to lift, and then I remembered everything. I felt an overwhelming desire. Usually that isn't something you feel in the morning, but this time, it was different. I wanted him. I think you understand. I got up, the cool floor beneath my bare feet, and walked toward the kitchen. There was something so intimate about that moment, seeing him there in the quiet morning, simply making breakfast. It felt domestic, natural. Without thinking, I moved behind him, wrapped my arms around his waist, and pressed my cheek against his back. His skin was warm, solid, and I could feel his breathing, steady and deep. For a brief moment he froze, his muscles tensing at my touch. Then he exhaled a shaky breath, relaxing slightly. He didn't turn around, just kept stirring the eggs, though his movements had slowed, more careful now. I could feel the tension in him, but it was different, not the good kind, but hesitation, uncertainty. It was there in how his shoulders tensed, in the way his breath hitched. He sighed deeply, and I could hear the conflict in it, as if he was trying to collect his thoughts, to put something complex into words. His voice was soft when he finally spoke, almost as if he was speaking to himself. He began to say it how it was wrong, how we shouldn't have let things go that far. But I didn't let him finish. I gently turned him toward me. His eyes were troubled, a storm of emotions swirling behind them. Guilt, maybe confusion, but also longing, vulnerability he was trying to conceal. I didn't need to hear the rest of what he was going to say. I already knew. We had crossed a line, and he felt it was a mistake, that it shouldn't have happened. I never felt differently, not even for a second. There was no sense of regret, no second guessing. This was real. This was ours. I gazed at him for a moment, locking eyes, allowing the silence to convey what I couldn't express. Then, without breaking eye contact, I knelt before him, my hands lightly resting on his hips as I gathered my hair. I could feel a shift in him, the way his breath hitched, his entire body frozen in place. The air around us was charged with tension, electric, but somehow different. The eggs had slightly burned, but neither of us minded. He leaned against the bar, and I did the same just a minute later. I was leaning on the counter, my palms pressing into the cool surface as I took in my surroundings. The air still carried the freshness of the morning, though the warmth between us was undeniable. I could feel him behind me, close enough that my heart raced. Yet there was a strange comfort in his proximity, as if nothing else mattered except this moment, this feeling. His body was only inches from mine, and I could sense his steady warmth, his solid form, offering reassurance that made me feel grounded and safe. I felt his breath on the back of my neck, warm and constant, and it sent a pleasant shiver through me. It was one of those moments when everything else fades away, and it's just the two of us, like time slows. His hands touched me next, a gentle but deliberate pressure on my shoulders, his fingers pressing lightly into my skin and sending a ripple of warmth through me. His hands moved over me with a comfort and grounding that made me instinctively lean into him. One hand slid to my waist, and I could feel his palm, large, warm, resting against my side. A subtle pressure that reminded me of how real this was, how deeply connected we were in that moment. I hadn't realized how much I longed for this closeness until now. The sensation of someone so near, the heat radiating from him, his hands moving with intent, almost as if communicating something unspoken. I could feel his fingers gently brushing through my hair, the softest, most soothing touch. His hand was gentle but strong, steady, making me feel like I could lean into him without fear of falling. His breath behind me was slow and steady, almost as if he were savouring the moment just as much as I was. Each exhale felt like a quiet reassurance, a silent promise that whatever this was between us didn't need to end. I could feel his chest rise and fall with each breath, and there was something profoundly intimate in the way we fit together in that space, with no need for words, just the rhythm of our bodies. It felt so natural, so easy, and yet incredibly intense, like every part of me was tuned to him. His hands moved from my shoulders to my waist, pulling me just a little closer, and I could feel the warmth of his body pressing against mine. There was a gentle pressure behind me that was grounding in a way that made everything else feel distant, as though we were in our own world, separated from anything else. I didn't want this feeling to end. It was as if everything else faded in importance, the mess in the kitchen, the passage of time, even the outside world. All that mattered was this connection, this simple but powerful closeness. His hands, the way they moved with such care, his breath syncing with mine, it was enough to make me feel as though this moment was exactly where I was meant to be. Nothing else mattered. There was no need for words, no need for anything else, just the quiet of the kitchen, the morning light streaming in, and his steady presence close to me. I wanted to remember this moment, this feeling, because it was one of those rare times when everything fell into place, when I felt seen, heard, and understood without needing to explain a thing. It was a quiet, unspoken connection that felt like it had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. And in that instant, I needed nothing more, just his hands, his breath, his presence. It was everything. The next few days passed quickly, and honestly, I didn't want them to end. Everything between us felt so easy and natural. There was nothing dramatic or over the top, it was just us being together, enjoying each other's company. We didn't talk much about what had happened or where things were headed. We just lived in that space for a while, and it felt good. But I knew it couldn't last. I started thinking about leaving, and that's when I realized how much I didn't want to go. I had gotten used to being with him, waking up next to him, enjoying the comfort of having him around. The thought of returning to my regular routine without him felt strange. It wasn't just about the physical closeness, it was everything, the quiet moments, the way we just fit together. We didn't discuss what was happening between us, and maybe that made it easier. It felt like we both knew it was temporary, just something for us to experience in that moment without pressure or expectations. It was just us, enjoying what we had for as long as it lasted. Now it's autumn, and I'm waiting for the next time I can visit him. I'm already looking forward to it, even though I know it might not change anything. But I still remember those days, the connection we shared, how good it felt. It was the best experience I've ever had, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was so close, so intense, so unforgettable. Sometimes we still text, but we don't talk about it much. Every now and then, we share pictures, little snippets of our lives. I send him photos of nature, just small things to keep the connection alive. But at the same time, I can't help but feel a little frustrated. We both know we can't be open about it, can't go out in public, can't be seen together. It's a strange kind of closeness with my real uncle.